Study the marine animals that interest you most in the Undersea Reference Set.
Sea otters, primitive tool.
South Pacific, islands galore. The Pacific Islands are home to blacktip reef shark, short and feisty. The blacktip shark may not be large, but it is fast and aggressive. Found in the warm waters of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, the blacktip shark grows to a length of 6 feet and can be easily recognized by the clear black markings on its dorsal and ventral fins. The blacktip shark is a powerful swimmer capable of moving quite rapidly when it attacks a favorite prey, such as a stingray, school of sardines, or butterfish. Blacktips are often seen leaping completely out of the water, though no one is quite sure why they do this. Blacktip sharks are most common in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, where sports fishermen like to try to catch them with a hook and reel. Like all other sharks, blacktips have a skeleton made of cartilage and not bone. Cartilage is lighter than bone and allows sharks to swim farther while expending less energy. Sharks, such as the blacktip shark, are not built for long periods of fast swimming. Most sharks' bodies are best suited to long-distance cruising, during which very little of their energy is used up. The moment food or danger is nearby, though, a shark like the blacktip is capable of high speeds of close to 20 miles an hour.
Arabian Seas, the oil route. The waters of the Arabian Peninsula and neighboring countries form a distinctive subregion of the Indian Ocean. This area Arctic Ocean, small and cold. The Arctic Ocean is the smallest of the world's oceans. Its average depth is about 3,300 feet, though in places it does reach about 6 times this. There are 4 major basins separated by 3 oceanic ridges, of which the largest, the Lomonosov Ridge, extends for 1,100 miles. Water enters and leaves the Arctic Ocean through the gap between Svalbard and Greenland. A deep water current near Svalbard accounts for nearly 80% of incoming water, which is balanced by a less saline outflow on the surface. 2% of the water leaving the ocean is in the form of icebergs. The ocean itself is covered by a layer of sea ice, which in later winter extends to up to 6 million square miles. In summer, it shrinks to about half this size. Many marine animals in the Arctic migrate as the sea ice advances and retreats with the seasons. Most live near the edge of the ice, which provides a hauling out area for such animals as polar bears, seals, and walruses. Numerous species are found all around the North Pole, but are often divided into several distinct stocks or subspecies. Many bird species are seasonal and also undergo long migrations. Human populations have existed around the Arctic Ocean for thousands of years. A distinction is often made between the Nordic populations, whose lifestyle is based on the herding of reindeer, and the North American, Siberian, and Greenland populations, who subsist by hunting marine animals. Mammals dominate the Arctic marine ecosystem. They include seals, walruses, whales, and polar bears. Although there is little wildlife at the center of the Arctic basin, around the edge, where the sea ice advances and retreats with the seasons, and winds and currents bring up nutrients from the depths, an abundance of marine animals and plants flourishes during the summer. Polynyas, which are small areas of open water in the ice, are used by birds and mammals as feeding grounds, as well as by peoples of the Arctic. These areas only open up in warm weather. The animals of the Arctic are suited to the extreme climatic conditions by a number of physiological and behavioral adaptations. Physiological adaptations in mammals include the thick layer of insulating blubber, which acts as a food reserve in times of hardship, a high body mass, and a low surface area. The blubber is built up by seals and whales during their summer feeding period. Constant foraging when conditions are favorable and the rapid development of young are adaptations that help individuals to meet their high energy requirements. The excellent insulating qualities of feathers enable birds to survive and even spend the winter in the Arctic. However, a high proportion of the Arctic birds migrate southwards in the summer. Harp seal dances with seals. Did you know that harp seals can dance? During the mating season, the male harp seal will court the female harp seal by dancing up and down in the water next to her, keeping his body and head held in a vertical position. Harp seals can be found in the White Sea, on the east coast of Greenland, and on the northern coast of Newfoundland. Young harp seals are born with a white coat, which gradually changes into a dark brown pattern as they grow older. Baby harp seals feed on mysids and euphasids, while adults eat crustaceans as well as herring, squid, and polar cod. Harp seals follow a migratory pattern and move south in the winter and north in the summer as the ice begins to melt.
Galapagos iguana, scary sea serpent. The giant iguanas of the Galapagos Islands are the only marine lizards other than marine crocodiles. They are big and black with large, warty masses of cells called tubercles on their heads and bodies. This makes them look much like the lava rock they usually bask on during the day. At night they go into crevices and caves higher on the shore to rest or sleep. As they are cold-blooded, their black skin helps them to take in the sun's rays and absorb warmth. Early explorers hunted iguanas for food and found them delicious. The iguanas seemed tame because they would not run into the cold seawater nearby. We now know that the iguanas must have the warmth of the sun to stay active. It is unhealthy for them to get cold for too long, so they are reluctant to enter the cold water when it is not necessary. These monster-like sea lizards are vegetarians. They feed on a brown seaweed called sargassum that grows on the underwater rocks, chewing it with their sharp teeth. These iguanas have flattened bodies and tails that they swing widely from side to side while swimming. Their arms and legs are pressed back along their sides. The only water for them to drink is seawater, but they have a handy salt gland in their noses that takes the extra salt out of their blood and produces drips of salty water that fall onto the rocks. The large female iguanas lay their eggs in caves near the shore, usually dug into sand or soil. Usually these burrows are within the territory of one dominant male who is the father.
Amberjack, strength in numbers. If you were a squid, an amberjack is one fish you wouldn't want to meet in a dark kelp bed. Amberjacks are fierce, powerful hunters that travel in giant schools and cruise the warm and temperate waters of the Atlantic in search of small fish and squid. Like the tuna and mackerel, amberjacks are well built for long-distance swimming. They have streamlined, muscular bodies, and their skin is covered by tiny, almost invisible scales that allow them to cruise through the water with little resistance. Amberjacks can grow to lengths of 6 feet or more and weigh as much as 120 pounds. Amberjacks are such determined hunters that they will often chase a school of small fish into a shallow lagoon just to get a meal. Young amberjacks look quite different from adults. Their bodies are thick rather than thin and covered with stripes. Even as young fish, amberjacks like to travel in enormous packs. Eventually, as amberjacks get older, they become less sociable and begin swimming in small groups of just a few fish. Arrow crab, hardly Cupid's arrow.
Arrow crabs are the daddy longlegs of the sea. They move slowly and deliberately as if in slow motion. This behavior, combined with their raggedy appearance, makes them very difficult to spot underwater. Their long legs are hollow tubes made up of tough chitin and filled with muscles down the center, just the opposite of humans, who have bones inside and muscles outside. These tubes of muscle are what you buy as crab legs in the supermarket. Crabs cannot exist out of water for more than a few minutes because their shells dry out very easily. During low tide, these crabs can be found under piles of moist seaweed, down in shady crevices, or in the remaining water of a tide pool. Crabs breathe by pumping water over the feathery gills on their bodies. Cockle, moving in leaps. There are many different cockle species on the European shores. It is easy to find their shells on the beach. This mollusk, which belongs to the genus Cardium, moves by leaping, supporting itself on its muscular foot. This foot shoots outside the valves and with a quick contraction causes the mollusk to be thrown upwards. It also uses this foot to bury itself in the mud or in the sand, where it spends most of its life. The cockle feeds on particles in suspension, which are part of the plankton, by filtering seawater through the cilia which cover their gills. In order to breed, both the male and female cockles expel their gametes into the water, where the spermatozoa fertilize the ova in a totally random process. This mollusk has a lot of enemies, among which is man, who harvests it by the millions. Sea anemone, meat-eating fly.
Brown sponge, always eating. It may seem unlikely, but sponges are giant feeding machines. Sponges are constantly filtering water through their bodies to trap the microscopic animals and small pieces of organic matter that float in the water. Sponges with large openings at the top of their bodies are the best at filtering lots of seawater for food. If you gently put your hand over the top of a sponge, the flow of water feels like a spring welling up out of the ground. On some shallow reefs, you can even see the ocean's surface continually bubbling up because large sponges are pushing water up through their mouths. Sponges use the same filtering system to reproduce. The sponge's male cells release tiny swimming cells into the water. These cells are tadpole-shaped and have a long hair that waves on their back end. The cells get swept up in the water currents of another sponge and then fertilize the eggs that are embedded in its wall. At this stage, the egg cell divides into more cells and the resulting larva, covered with hair-like cilia, swims out to find a new home. Once the larva settles somewhere, it grows rapidly, sometimes living only a year or so. It's also possible for a sponge to produce small buds that turn into new sponge animals without sexual reproduction. In fact, people who fish for sponges to sell have known for some time that if you separate a living sponge into little pieces and attach these pieces to good spots on the sea bottom, each would develop into a new sponge in several months to a year. Oceans, climate, and weather.
The oceans have been referred to as the flywheel of the climate system, since like a flywheel they store energy in the form of heat when it is in plentiful supply during the day or summer, and release it to the atmosphere when sunshine is absent or in short supply at night or during the winter. But this analogy is inadequate because the oceans do not just act as a passive energy store, but also play an active role, with ocean currents moving thermal energy from the warmer tropical and subtropical regions to the higher latitudes. As warm ocean currents move toward the poles, they lose heat to the atmosphere, and the warm air, when carried by winds over neighboring land masses, warms the land at night or during the winter. Oceans, therefore, play a part in determining the climate of a specific region by reducing the extremes of temperature which would otherwise occur. Western Europe, for instance, has a much more mild climate than Eastern and Central Europe because of the heat from the Gulf Stream which moves into the atmosphere. The temperature differences between land and sea reflect the different rate at which they absorb and lose heat. The land surface heats up faster than the sea during the day, but loses heat faster during the night or in winter. This is because the upper layers of the ocean mix with those below, passing some of the heat gained during the day downwards, and so reducing the rate at which it is lost to the atmosphere. The temperature range of the entire ocean is therefore small, from about 28 degrees Fahrenheit, the freezing point of salt water, to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, although temperatures as high as 95 degrees Fahrenheit are found in some semi-enclosed seas. During the course of a day, ocean temperatures rarely vary by more than 1 degree, and usually no more than 18 degrees over a year. For comparison, the range of temperature experienced in the middle of a continent during a year can be as great as 144 degrees Fahrenheit, and deserts may be scorching during the day, but freezing at night.
Southern Ocean, the deep freeze. The Southern Ocean, the great unbroken expanse of sea linking the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans, surrounds the unique continent of Antarctica. Its waters are ruled by powerful winds known as the Roaring Forties, the Furious Fifties, and the Shrieking Sixties, and its southern boundary is the ice cliffs and rocks of the Antarctic coast. The continent itself forms a hub around the South Pole. The shores of Antarctica are fringed by seas that are almost entirely ice-covered. In winter, 8 million square miles of sea have an ice crust. Even in summer, the coastal waters bear 1.2 million square miles of ice. This fluctuating fringe of ice can be seen as one boundary of the Antarctic, but most biologists prefer using a boundary known as the Antarctic Convergence Zone, an invisible frontier in the sea where cold surface waters meet warmed surface seas. The icy seas and frozen wastes of Antarctica present one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. Yet the Southern Ocean is home to large numbers of seabirds, seals, and whales. This abundance of life depends on the biological productivity of the Southern Ocean. It is estimated that the Southern Oceans produce as much as 610 million tons of plant matter a year. Today, Antarctica contains over 90% of the Earth's ice. This represents about 70% of the planet's fresh water. The ice has accumulated to an average depth of about 6,500 feet over the continent as a whole, with more than 9,850 feet at many points above the low-lying rock floor of the continent. If all this ice melted, global sea levels would be raised by 200 feet. If the enormous weight of all this ice were removed, the surface of Antarctica could rise by 650 to 1,000 feet. Glaciers move slowly towards the sea and feed floating ice shelves. Known to pioneer explorers as ice barriers, the shelves are 657 to 984 feet thick and border the ocean over hundreds of miles. They can reach a depth underwater of between 490 to 820 feet. In winter, massive icebergs float among the sea ice. This creates a danger to shipping and mobile oil installations, which become trapped in the surface ice, unable to move out of the path of the icebergs. Only a narrow coastal fringe lies between the Antarctic ice cap and the sea. It is on this tiny area of land that most of the wildlife of the Antarctic lives and breeds, and where more than 70 scientific research stations have been set up. 2,000 to 3,000 tourists visit Antarctica each year, attracted by the scenery and abundant wildlife. Southern Ocean, the deep freeze. Arctic Ocean, small and cold. North Atlantic Basin, hot and cold.
The
West African Seas, population explosion.
Arabian Seas, the oil route. Mediterranean Sea, Europe's bathtub. Arctic Ocean, small and cold. North Atlantic Basin, hot and cold.
West African Seas, population explosion.
Arabian Seas, the oil route. Mediterranean Sea, Europe's bathtub. Mediterranean Sea, Europe's